morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our employer webinar titled Endpoint Assessment Sharing Experiences. We'd like to thank you for joining us. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to explain a few things about our webinar platform to allow you to get the most out of your experience. All the viewers will be in listen mode only. However, to engage with the webinar, please use the on-screen panel. Using the tabs of this panel, you can adjust your audio settings and choose to see the webcam of our presenters. You can also use the question and chat tabs to engage with us. We expect the webinar we expect that the webinar will be extremely popular, but our team will do our best to answer your questions and queries. After the webinar, we will be providing a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides and fact sheet to address any unanswered questions. Now, I'd like to hand you over to our presenters, Alexander O'Connor, the EPA Strategic Manager of Apprenticeships Delivery, and Matthew Scarff, Category Manager of Apprenticeships. Over to you guys.
Okay, great. So we're live, yeah? They can see us on the screen. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. I hate doing presentations without the audience directly in front of me, so this will be interesting for all of us, I'm sure. Mark, apologies from Mark, he's only able to join as a guest, so he's unable to speak. We couldn't get the technology to work for him to be a panelist, but I've got an update from him which I'll share with you guys. This presentation, we're going to be just taking you through some of the things that we've learned over the last 3 years from delivering endpoint assessment. I will talk about what we're developing with regards to engineering, and we will be coming back to you in the near future with more information about our emerging offer in the engineering endpoint assessments. This presentation shouldn't take much more than sort of 25-30 minutes, and then we've allowed 15 minutes at the end for any questions and answers. So, onto the first slide. Okay, so we're currently live in over 40 EPAs, actually nearer sort of 50. And they're the sectors that we're currently operating in. So engineering, hair, land-based, management leadership, business skills, digital, hospitality, vehicle maintenance, health and social care, building services. I appreciate that we're talking, you guys are mostly interested in engineering, albeit I'm sure you do operate in a number of those sectors. And what we're going to talk about in terms of the lessons learned can actually be applied to, that they sort of cut across all of those standards. So we've faced issues in hospitality, which will be valid for the stuff you guys are doing in engineering. In terms of what we're developing, so we're working with Mark and GTA England to develop a market-leading offer within engineering. It's something which is core to City & Guild's sort of brand. We've had a presence in engineering for a number of years, well, tracing back our early beginnings to sort of 140 years ago. And with EPA, we've got the opportunity to reinvigorate our offer, and it's perhaps closer to sort of the model that we've offered in the past of engineering, where we've been able to offer much more in-depth support materials. So that's where we're sort of heading with engineering. We're developing engineering endpoint assessments. We're currently going live with MOE, as we refer to it, so Maintenance Operations Engineering Technician, and we'll be operating in 4 standards, 4 pathways within that, so control, electrical, mechanical, and we're also going to be adding a 4th, which is Mechie-Lec. We're developing EPAs in engineering operative, engineering fitter, and metal fabricator, and we'll be coming out hopefully with some dates when those will go live for us. We're also working with Mark and the guys to establish a network of high quality engineers. Sorry, is that all right? You've got feedback on that? Yeah? Can you just turn the volume down? Thanks. So, and just feedback from Mark on that the contract has been agreed with Sitting Guilds, and all of the questions and changes that were raised by you guys have been accepted in some form. So we're over the moon with that, that's going to be moving forward. It is a model that we have used elsewhere with single point suppliers on providing assessors, and it is working very well. And I think personally, it's the way that endpoint assessment will ultimately move to work the numbers that need to be delivered over the coming years to meet the government's expectations of apprenticeship numbers. So just a little bit about our wider offer. So we were actually first past the post in 2016. So the ink hadn't even dried on the emerging Richards review and the policy implementation before we'd actually delivered our first endpoint assessment in operational delivery. We have over 30,000 registrations with us. We believe that's market leading, but obviously, we can't access our competitor intelligence, but I'm sure we have got the highest number of registrations. That figure's probably quite a way in excess, so probably 35,000 registrations. We've delivered, it's close to 3,000 actual endpoint assessments, and we've got over 300 assessors on our books. So they sort of put it into context in terms of the numbers, and as I'm sure it's perhaps felt as acutely with you guys as it is here, EPA is a complete departure from the previous model of apprenticeship. So the SACE framework, which built on the frameworks before it, which had really the MVQ model, which had been in place since the 80s. So EPA has hit us all very hard, but hopefully this comes to reassure you that we're doing large numbers and we're fully committed as an endpoint assessment organisation to EPAs, and those numbers will only grow. So just briefly, and apologies, I'll just check my watch that I don't sort of run ahead because I do tend to talk quite quickly. So I liken EPA to a mountain. So I mentioned previously that the EPA represents a significant change from SACE, and I'm perhaps not towing the line when I say this, but it's sort of EPA pulled the rug from under us in terms of the speed of the changes and the extent of the changes. And so we had a tried and trusted system that had been in place for sort of 30 years previously, where when your apprentices started on the programme, provided you knew they were of the right calibre, you would know where they were at any point on the programme, and then if they got through their sort of 2, 3, 4-year apprenticeship, they'd get out the other side. EPA came into place and sort of put this endpoint assessment at the end and threw up a whole lot of uncertainty. You know, how do we sort of navigate this endpoint assessment? How do we find the right route up my metaphorical mountain, and what's on the other side? So we're investing heavily and have invested heavily on making sure that we have a rich and deep on-programme offer to help people through the programme. So there are qualifications in those engineering standards that we're developing, and we're making sure those qualifications are mapped to the endpoint assessment. So again, you can use the qualification to sort of mark your way through the journey, but we'll also be developing other materials to support those. There's also, we're putting a great effort on EPA support material, because this mountain has sort of come out of nowhere, and so there's a huge amount of uncertainty about what the EPA represents. And when we survey our customers, which we do regularly, and also as well as getting anecdotal feedback, uncertainty around EPA and how to get through it is their #1 concern. It puts other sort of priorities, it puts them in the shade. So whereas we may think that you guys are ultimately price sensitive, when we actually ask you, the #1 thing that comes back is that support through EPA is what is required. We're also on hand to provide support and guidance through the endpoint assessment process, and I'll talk about that towards the end. But EPA, it's not a simple replacement for SACE, and I'm sure you guys are aware of that. It is quite complicated, and so we've had to build quite a comprehensive system to be able to support you. So you have those regular touch points with us throughout your journey. Now, just on the EPA support material, just there's the sort of list of kind of things we do. So there's the endpoint assessment packs, there's handbooks, there's occupational specific FAQs. We also provide exemplar materials, so examples of what good looks like for endpoint assessment that is specific to that EPA. So when we talk about what we're looking at with MOE, for example, what is a good example of a project? What are project templates? So these things that perhaps as GTAs you may not I don't know, you may not have done extensive projects. So I'm thinking of sort of like the BTEC projects in engineering. That may not be an area you've done before. So there may be significant questions about, well, how do I sort of go about setting up a project? What is good practice? You know, what should I expect the apprentices to be doing when they're running projects within the companies they're working with? So that's an area where we'll look to develop more detailed guidance and templates, but also exemplars of what good looks like. So as I mentioned earlier, we're on hand to help you through the EPA journey. So we've boiled it down to an 8-step process, which is quite a lot of steps. It was a lot more than that, and it could be a lot more than that. And that really speaks to the level of complexity within EPA generally. So this is actually a very sort of simplified, and we've worked very hard to make sure that at every stage you know where you are and you know who to speak to within city and guilds. So this is actually taken from a website. It's a interactive PDF document. So when you click through to stage 2, it will tell you, give you the relevant information there. And then you can always track back and click on speak to us and get through to us with relative ease. So now that's, and I'm not a salesman, so that's my sort of sales pitch over with. Now what I am good at doing is picking up on the negatives of things and being a cynic, which perhaps has stood me in perhaps good stead with the challenges that we face with EPA. So what I will try to be, myself and Alex, is very frank with you some of the challenges that we faced with endpoint assessment, how we've looked to traverse them, and what we've learned, and what we'd like to share with you guys going forward. They fall into very broad brush areas that I'm sure all of you are aware of and are working towards, but it's always good to share these things, because sometimes you may think, well, is it just me? And that's certainly examples we found where it's not just us. These are common issues. So the issues here are with regards to, they should be agnostic in terms of the assessment organisation you're working with, and hopefully they'll ring true for some of you guys. So the first thing to sort of start with is the assessment plan, and if you're a bit of a qualifications geek like me, you can go on for ages about sort of how this is a massive departure from what came before. I'll try not to do that in great length, but it's just worth remembering where we were beforehand, where you had national occupational standards that ran to sort of, you know, hundreds and hundreds of pages with detailed statements of the knowledge and competency required, even within the range. So people could make some very objective decisions. The reforms came in and we had to boil that standard down to just 2 pages, or rather the employer trailblazer groups did, and then from that they had to create an assessment plan, and that assessment plan, the government didn't really want that to be any more than 8 pages. So we've gone from a system which had huge amounts of detail behind it to something that feels quite cursory and quite high level. From an awarding body perspective, that can cause all sorts of worries. You know, how do we reach objective decisions, and how do we ensure we have consistency across our colleagues at other awarding bodies? And these are all sort of live issues. The thing I want to get across here is start with the assessment plan. Make sure you know that thing inside out, front and backwards. Like I've said, they're not long documents. They may not take you that long to read. You know, if you have trouble sleeping at night, perhaps take it to bed with you, because some of them are quite boring, but they are hugely important. And you know, if in there's concerns, you need to raise those early on, and you can raise those early on with us, or you can defer back to the EQA body. So in the case of engineering, the majority of the EQA bodies are the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, but we'll always work with you to find an answer. And what we do know about the government is that they're moving very fast, and they are aware of the challenges these sort of assessment plans have presented, and they're looking for people to sort of help them out. So if there are issues within them, that doesn't have to be written in stone. You know, if there's something in there that you can't negate from an assessment point of view and a delivery point of view, then the door is always open at the Institute of Apprenticeships to find a way around it. So you can always pick up the phone to us and talk about it, but just sort of some of the things to sort of highlight there. So it sets out everything that the apprenticeship needs to cover, outlines the sequence of EPA components. Now within engineering, the components, the majority of the ones that I've seen within engineering EPAs are relatively straightforward. There are some out there though that are a bit more complicated. So if I talk to sort of just hospitality, which you guys may not be interested in, but hospitality, some of those assessment plans have in excess of sort of 5 components within them that have to be done in a sequential order, and you can't progress from one until you've done the previous one. And then they're all tied to sort of a quite comprehensive grading model. Now, it's all set out in the assessment plan, but what we have found is some centres haven't necessarily picked up on the detail, or in some cases they perhaps haven't read that detail. And so we sort of turn up and, you know, they're potentially doing the endpoint assessment out of sequence, and then from our point of view, we can't progress from there. It also sets out the expectation from the employers and their role within endpoint assessment. So employers are being put to the forefront of apprenticeship policy, and that's carried through with the assessment plans. Now, what we find is the majority of What we find is that you guys, so providers, are still very much in the driving seat, but as changes come into place, so now you have to nominate your EQA and you have to make sure that the employers signed up to that EQA, they are coming to the fore, and we are dealing with employers on a daily basis who are asking questions of us about how they engage with the assessment plan, what they need to do, when actually employers aren't delivering themselves. They just want to know more because they're not necessarily getting that information from their training provider that they've selected. So again, it sort of sets things out there, and in terms of helping manage your relationship, it's making sure the employers are aware of those roles early on, because when we'll come on to later, you don't want to get to the endpoint assessment and not have the employer on board, because issues can arise in things like observations and making sure things are in the right place at the right time. So sorry, Alex, is there anything you wanted to add to that before I...
No, I think you covered most of it, but it is really important to really understand that back to front, that the people that I've been out to see to help them through the process, it's amazed me how many times they've said that they haven't actually looked at the assessment plan, and you know, fundamentally that is the first document to go to. And
just to sort of carry it, because we did this, Alex and I, previous to sitting here, both worked together at the same training provider. So we're very much aware of the pressures that you guys are under. So it's not a criticism. You know, we couldn't make the apprenticeship system more complicated if we tried from a government policy perspective. So some of these things that are just are a function of the policy that we're operating under. So it's certainly not criticism on our part.
No, not at all, not at all. And I think that does nicely, that document, with our endpoint assessment packs, because the other thing, the resources and the amount of effort we've put into resources to help you. If you look at the endpoint assessment plan on the IFA website, if you download that and use our EPA assessment pack material, both will really help you through the process.
Yeah. So portfolios. So portfolios still feature very heavily in apprenticeships, despite government wanting to move away from MVQs, and they are underpin a number of the engineering EPAs, where you're providing a portfolio that perhaps forms the basis of the professional discussion. So I think that's the case in engineering operative, and also in metal fabricator and some of the others. Showcase isn't a term that's used in engineering, but so it's more portfolios. What we have seen is, in the absence of clear guidance or objective guidance, we perhaps have jumped in a time machine, and we're seeing portfolios the likes of which we've not seen since the early 90s. So there's someone's delivering them in a sort of flatbed lorry, and they're being handed to us, and we're sort of wading through them. So they need to be more concise, or they need to be concise. And again, referring to our material should give you a better guide on that. But there is a flip side. So on the one hand, I'm saying don't send us your portfolios from the 1990s, War and Peace. But also, if you don't send enough information, there is a risk that you're doing a disservice to the apprentice, and they're not getting the fullest out of the EPA, because we won't know where to direct our questions, for example, if the portfolio isn't comprehensive. So there is a sort of, on the one hand, I'm saying don't send too much, but then don't send not enough. So again, we will provide detailed guidance on what a good portfolio looks like. And, you know, it's not going to be definitive. Certainly in the early days, we'll be talking to you guys regularly about what the portfolio should look like, and where we're lacking in terms of the guidance, and where we perhaps need to be a bit more focused on things we want from you. But again, if this is a common issue, so if your awarding body isn't feeding back about the portfolios you guys are sending in for EPA, then great, you've obviously done a great job. Or perhaps they're working like Billio to wade through some sort of very robust portfolios. But, you know, this will ultimately all come out in the wash, because we're not in an MVQ model anymore. You know, we are sampling 100% everything you send us. So in the MVQ world, whereas the portfolio was dip sampled and we verified them, you know, that's not happening here. We look at these 100%. So if the market goes to the point where we have to look at things 100%, then that needs to be reflected in the cost that we pass on to our customers. So, you know, if we are in a world with very large portfolios, then EPAs could only get more expensive. But again, we'll provide more detail and better templates, hopefully, to get to a point where we have some sort of decent guidance for you guys to use.
I think also is to have confidence in yourself and have confidence in your own quality assurance processes. You know, we can give you guidance, but what we don't want to do is dictate. So because some people might have a more innovative way in which to present the portfolio, but as Matt said, it's about picking out the best quality evidence and looking at it holistically, and where there is a good piece of holistic evidence, that's what we're looking for. And again, I'm sure if you've got your quality assurance processes in place, as you should, you know, you would have had over the years, then you know, have the confidence in what you're putting forward.
A sort of wrap up. This is, you know, I am probably stating the obvious here, but it's being prepared for the day. So are the apprentices prepared? You know, have you gone through it with them in advance? Is there sort of some mock setup you've worked with them to make sure they're ready? And by that, it's not just being ready to do the job they need to do. You know, this may be new to them in terms of an external verifier coming in. We all know what it's like, you know, driving a car and doing your driving test, you know, the pressure that you're under with an examiner in the car with you. So again, are you doing enough to prepare them for that the anxieties they'll have and the issues they'll face on the day? Are the employers prepared? So again, this is critically important. If we look at the assessment plan for maintenance engineering operative, you know, it's quite a hefty observation, you know, allowing up to sort of 6 hours of a third party being on an employer's premises looking at activities. You know, are they prepared? Are the apprentices going to be able to demonstrate what is required? You know, if the assessment plan is asking them for a specific sort of action to be carried out, is that action available for them to do that, you know, on the day? So, and is everything going to be covered in the observation on the day? So again, that feeds back to everyone being prepared. Now, we can recount many examples of where people haven't been prepared, but sort of just a sort of couple that sort of spring to mind. Again, not in engineering, but more in the sort of softer skills area. You know, where the employer wasn't really prepared, the apprentice wasn't prepared, and we just turned up to literally watch someone be sat at a desk, not doing anything for a day. So in old money, in MVQ world, in SACE, we could have probably got something from that with sort of further questioning. From EPA point of view, that was a fail. So just that failure to prepare on the part of the centre for the employer, carried through to the apprentice, and that sort of weighs us on us sort of very heavy. And again, other things where ties back to reading the assessment plan in hospitality, where we were expecting them to cook a specific dish off of a recipe log, which should have been agreed in advance. These guys rocked up, cooked an amazing 3-course meal. It was fantastic, really great, but it wasn't within the assessment criteria. They didn't demonstrate anything that we wanted. Well, they did demonstrate, but they were off beam in terms of what they were meant to do. So again, that marked as a sort of fail on their part. And this is where EPA is really being quite a shock to the system for those transitioning to SACE, because you're suddenly bringing failure into apprenticeships that didn't necessarily exist before. And then there's all of the fallout that deals with that. So while we can say hand on heart, that's a failure against the assessment criteria, rather than not hand on heart, we can be very objective. That doesn't change the fact that it's a shock to the system for the apprentice, and then you've got to deal with that shock as the training provider. So there's pushback from you guys against us. So one thing I would just sort of finish on in terms of talking about some of the challenges, there is a bit of a void at the moment in terms of regulatory responsibility. So in the old world, where we had one regulator that we were working towards, which was Ofqual, we now within apprenticeship have multiple regulators who are all trying to find their feet, and some are doing great work. But in that absence, we have to make sure that we maintain high standards. So we're in the position where we can sort of put things down in black and white and have to make some very hard decisions. So there is an element of sort of that sort of more, I'm trying to think of another way to say policeman role, but that's perhaps how we're sort of being put in that sort of position where in the absence of sort of clear direction from regulators, we have to be quite strident in some of the decisions that we make, and it's challenges. Yeah. So just to prep, and I will just wrap up because I've been told for 30 minutes now. So in terms of back to my mountain analogy, don't underestimate how difficult the EPA is and the challenge of the logistics, which is something that comes back common for us that people just don't understand just how difficult it is. So they'll book a weeks in advance to have an assessor come out to them on the 5th of June, and then ring us the day before saying, well, they're not going to be ready, can we just do it tomorrow? It's like, well, no, because that's one of sort of 500 that we're doing at the moment. We can't move our logistics like that. And then from your point of view, making sure you've got the logistics in place in terms of making sure the employer's aligned. Keeping regular early contact with your endpoint assessment organisation. Don't leave it until the gateway, until you get in contact with us. If you take anything away from that, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of all endpoint assessment organisations, get in contact early on. Don't leave it to gateway until the point at which you register with us. You're potentially back-ending a lot of problems there, and it's ultimately going to be doing a disservice to the apprentice there. Allow enough time to prepare both yourself and the apprentice for endpoint assessment. Touched on it earlier about endpoint assessment being like a driving test, and certainly when you're dealing with those 19 to 24 or younger learners, that's a massive pressure to put them under there. And just to sort of mention that we have developed some material that prepares them for those types of assessments.
I think the interactive tool that we've got, the 8 steps as well, if you go through that really helps support, how you can plan as well in your organisation to ensure you register and book in plenty of time so that you're not disappointed and you get your endpoint assessment event date when you're expecting it to take place. Because you could be disappointed if you leave it too late, and you might have to push out that date further than you would have liked. So I'd urge you to have a look at that document.
Yeah. And there is that document.
Oh, didn't even know.
And so so this is on our website, and when this is sort of published and Mark would like this on his website, we'll make sure we've got the links to these documents as well. So it's now really over to you guys. Any questions, anything you'd like to pick me up on, or any experiences you guys would like to share? So after. No
just
questions.
Come in.
Oh, okay.
Come in as of yet. So any other points that you'd like to?
Anything else we'd like to, while we wait for any questions, if there are any questions?
Covered quite a lot in terms of our experiences. I think the main thing said is it is about being prepared for this change step, and I think more and more we're finding people are getting their heads around it. But if you're quite new to starting to book endpoint assessment, because certain standards they're a bit behind others, and if you're that one of those organisations that you don't have a big catalogue of standards that you deliver and you haven't yet experienced this, it's just use all the information you can get, and it's just about preparation.
Yeah, if you could just go back to the previous slide.
The 5 Ps.
Yeah.
Proper preparation for
yeah.
performance.
So just one thing I'd like to say in the absence of any questions is, so this is quite a robust sort of process and perhaps quite different to what you've been used to. But this is where the market's being driven. So I'm sure a number of our competitors will be coming out with some very sort of short timescales in which we'll contact us at this day, we'll get back to you at this date, we'll do these kind of things. They're perhaps short-term fixed. The whole market is moving towards EPA, and EPA is much more resource intensive on the endpoint assessment organisation's part. So we're sending out assessors. These things take a lot of time to sort of organise. So over time, we will. Over time, you know, we'll all be working to a system where you engage with us much earlier on to be able to service you at the later stage of endpoint assessment.
Questions?
Any questions?
We'll cover that very comprehensively.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Well,
if there are any questions, I guess there's a way of contacting us.
Mark is logged in. Yeah. But as a panelist.
Yes.
All right. So Mark, you're logged in as a panelist, so you can speak if you want to, if the technology allows.
Okay, I believe I'm unmuted.
Yes. Hi, Mark.
Thank you very much for that experience information. I think it might be helpful just to give our colleagues an indication of just where we are with the standards. You rightly mentioned, Matt, that we are kind of in a position where we're going to get live with the MOE standard first of all. And I know that there's at least, I think there are 3 of our members that are actively involved in that, and that would be Gen 2 up in Cumbria, Heta over in Humberside, and Nightal have a requirement as well. So I think over the summer we're going to get to a point where you will actually, those Gen 2 on behalf of the guilds will be undertaking endpoint assessment in MOE for the other 2 providers that we just mentioned. So just to give colleagues an idea that is kind of getting to a point where it's operational, and I just thought that would be quite helpful. Also, thank you, Alex, for the work we did on the contract, and I'm hopeful that members will be very pacified by what we managed to agree. And although you'd not want me to mention another organisation with whom we're working on endpoint assessment, but I'm very hopeful that by the end of this week we'll be in exactly the same place regarding a contract, and that one also covers things like marketing, protocols and the like. So I just thought I'd chip in with those 2 points.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. And yeah, so thanks for mentioning those centres, because with GDPR policy, obviously I couldn't sort of reel them off. But yeah, so we're in regular contact with those guys and making sure we're getting the assessors in place. So that's rolling this year. I can't come out with any definitive timescales on the other apprenticeships that we're in development at the moment, but as soon as I can, which hopefully will be in the coming weeks, we'll share those dates and more of that detail with you. We do sort of have priorities, so we're looking to be ready with them at the time that you guys need them, in terms of when the SACE frameworks are ultimately switched off. So we're trying to ensure that we don't put you guys in a position with gaps in provision. But as soon as I have some hard and fast dates, then I will obviously share them with you, Mark, and your members.
Fantastic, Matt. So any questions from members?
So we've got no questions on our message boards, Mark. So I think rather than Alex and I pad for time, unless there's anything else you want to say, Mark, and by all means you can chat about other awarding bodies if you want. We're relatively agnostic here in that regard. We're not salespeople, Alex and myself. If there's nothing else, then we'll give you some time back.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for putting this on.
No, you're welcome. And we'll be coming back to you guys with more stuff, and we've got more to share on engineering. And I think this is possibly a good forum. So I'd be interested to get the feedback from you guys as to how they found it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.